Um, so, if you didn't know, we are the Denver Communists.
Yes, we're the Denver Communists. Cody and I are going to be presenting today. We've been given some recommended readings for this evening. They were listed in the Facebook syllabus. If you have not read them, it's not a big deal. The links are always there. And Cody and I are going to give you kind of a brief description on those documents and what we've drawn from them.
And we hope to answer these questions. What is the Denver Communist political tradition, and what does it mean to join? So, regarding a political tradition, here is an overview of the major historical splits in the socialist tradition, beginning with the split between scientific socialism and utopian socialism, the split between the revolutionaries and reformists, the Bolshevik tradition, Stalin versus Leninism, Trotsky versus Stalin. I could not help but thinking about bringing back Celebrity Deathmatch while I was going through this whole timeline. Trotskyism after Trotsky, the international socialist tendency, the theory of party and class, the theory of deflected permanent revolution, the Denver Communists and the International Socialist Organization, and the Denver Communists and the RSN going forward. The first major historical split in the socialist tradition was between the Marxists, who essentially believe in socialism from the bottom up, and the utopians, idealists, who believe in socialism from the bottom, or from the top down, rather. The second major split is between the revolutionaries who sought to replace capitalism with a workers' state, and the reformists whose approach was to take over the capitalist state machine by electing a majority of socialist candidates to Congress. Reformism fatalistically saw socialism as the inevitable result of capitalism, really a revival of the top-down approach that Marx rejected in his split with the utopians. The other side of this fundamental division with the reformist, social democratic, socialism from above tendency was the continuation of Marxism represented by the Revolutionary Bolshevik Party in Russia, which was led by Lenin. It opposed World War I, and after its own revolution in 1917, formed the Communist International in 1919 to encourage revolution throughout the world. Lenin and the Bolshevik Party rejected reformism or popular frontism, but not the fight for reforms. They felt that in non-revolutionary periods, the Revolutionary Party should ally with reformist workers to win partial demands. In this alliance, called a united front, the revolutionaries would maintain their independent organization and political perspective. They would try to convince the other workers to become revolutionaries by propaganda about the long-term goal and by proposing more effective methods of struggle for the common goals. Lenin and the Bolsheviks believed in education and patiently explaining revolutionary ideas. For Marxists, a revolutionary situation cannot be created by the will of a party and must be created by the working class majority. Stalinism, though it claimed to be a continuation of Leninism, was the opposite, just another form of socialism from above. Circa 1930, the communist parties were ordered to be ultra-left, rejecting united fronts with other workers. This helped to lead to Hitler's rise in power in Germany. In a panic, Stalin then shifted the communist parties back to reformist strategy, the Popular Front. He ordered them to support peaceful capitalist parties and governments who might ally with Stalin against Hitler. The idea of revolution was thrown out the window. Later, in 1939, there was a switch back to a verbal leftist line in the Western democracies when Stalin allied himself with Hitler. In response to Stalin's perversion of Lenin and Marx's heritage, Leon Trotsky tried to preserve the real content of that tradition. He supported internationalism and democracy instead of socialism in one country. He called for a continuation of the revolutionary policy of the early Communist International, or Comintern. Instead of flipping from ultra-left rejection of a united front with other workers to reformist popular fronts with the capitalists, he urged a consistent Leninist policy of independent revolutionary parties forming united fronts with other workers' parties around immediate demands such as fighting fascism. He condemned Stalin's bureaucratic rule and called for a return to Soviet democracy. He urged workers to lead the movements and take them forward to socialist revolution, which he called the theory of permanent revolution. He based this in part on the practice of the Bolsheviks in Russia. For his efforts, he was expelled from Russia and ultimately assassinated by an agent of Stalin. His writings and his attempt to build revolutionary organizations that continued the real Marxist and Leninist tradition were what saved later revolutionaries years of work in reviving it. Before his death, Trotsky helped form the Fourth International of very small groups around the world. The Denver Communists and the Seattle Revolutionary Socialists come from that tradition.
So after World War II, the Trotskyist movement split over new political developments, primarily the Russian takeover of Eastern Europe and the imposition of the Russian-style economy there. Trotsky had continued to call Russia a degenerated workers' state until his death in 1940. By this, he meant that in spite of the rise of the bureaucracy, the workers' state of 1917 had never been overthrown. In spite of all his criticism of the Russian state, he felt the economy was still in a transitional stage between capitalism and socialism and was thus progressive over capitalism. He was wrong. By 1940, the workers had lost all power in the state to the new ruling class, and a form of capitalism had been restored. There was a historical case to be made for Trotsky's position, since there had been a workers' revolution in Russia in 1917. But in Eastern Europe, no such revolution had ever happened, yet the same form of economy now existed there that existed in Russia. If Trotsky was right that Russia was still a workers' state, the Eastern European states must be workers' states as well. If so, then workers' states could be formed without workers' revolutions. Stalinism, instead of being a counter-revolutionary force, as Trotsky had claimed, would become a revolutionary one, since invading armies could create worker states, which is the first step towards socialism. There would be very little left of socialism as the self-emancipation of the working class. Ironically, Trotsky's description of Russia threatened to undermine his own attempt to maintain the Marxist and Leninist heritage. Many of those who stuck with Trotsky's description followed out the non-Marxist logic of it to one degree or another. Some totally collapsed into Stalinism, since it was proved that Stalinism was now a revolutionary force when it carried revolution into Eastern Europe. For most Trotskyists, the non-Marxist logic of workers' state analysis had a destructive effect on their politics, moving them away from focusing on workers' self-emancipation. They often began to look to other forces to bring socialism.
Silly Trotsky, revolution is for the workers. Really though, what was he thinking? I don't know, and I will learn more as I go. We're coming up to the creation of the international socialist tendency. The IST represented a return to the fundamentals of Marx, Lenin, and Trotsky after the spread of post-World War II confusion, burnout, and resignation among Marxist revolutionaries. The invasion of Eastern Europe and the creation of the Russian-style regimes there convinced the IST that the current Russian state itself could no longer be a workers' state. The IST started the other direction for most Trotskyists with the undisputed facts and basic Marxist theory. There was no workers' revolution in Eastern Europe. Therefore, there was no workers' state in Eastern Europe. Therefore, the identical economy in Russia could not be controlled by a workers' state. This led to a re-examination of Russian history and a determination that Stalin had led a counter-revolution.
So, discussing the theory of party and class, the International Socialist tendency is one of the few that does not consider itself to be the revolutionary vanguard party and yet still feels that such a party is necessary. This theory aimed to clarify that the party was not the same as the state. For both Stalinists and Social Democrats, the Socialist Party and the state are virtually identical. For Lenin, the Soviets or workers' councils, which included the whole working class, were the basis of the workers' state. The party would have influence in the state by winning support in those councils, but the workers could and did elect different parties to the Soviet.
The IST also contributed to the theory of deflected permanent revolution. After World War II, virtually the whole colonial world won independence without a proletarian revolution. The IST accepted the core of Trotsky's strategy and rejected the stages theory. The theory of deflected permanent revolution examined the factors that led to the failure of the working class to take the lead in the anti-colonial revolution. The primary factor was the lack of strong revolutionary socialist parties, and instead the dominance of Stalinism as the road to economic independence. Workers' self-emancipation and internationalism are still at the core of the revolution.
So, giving some background info on the Denver Communists and the ISO. In spite of the important contributions that the IST made to the revolutionary movement, it had several weaknesses. The tendency was organized from London in a top-down manner. The ISO, the predecessor of the Denver Communists and the Seattle Revolutionary Socialist, was expelled from the tendency in 2001 over differences in perspective. From that point on, the ISO applied the general politics of the IST, adapting those politics to the US situation. The top-down nature of the IST by 2001 reflected, degeneration of its view of the Revolutionary Party. There were several overlapping issues that caused the dissolution of the ISO. One was the influence of the aforementioned top-down structure of the IST on the ISO. Though the ISO broke from the IST, it never fully broke from the IST's methods. Some comrades went so far as to describe the relationship between the leaders and the rank and file as abusive. Another issue was that many members of the ISO were moving in an opportunistic direction in response to the success of the DSA from 2017 onward and the influence of the Bernie Sanders campaign. In order to relate to the new socialist movement, a wing of the ISO called Socialist Tide called for support of the Sanders campaign. In doing so, they jettisoned a fundamental principle of Marxism, the need for the working class to be politically independent from the capitalist class and its parties. The final straw that caused the dissolution was the revelation of a mishandled rape accusation in 2013. It turned out that a new member of the ISO leadership that took over in February 2019 had been accused of rape after details about how the case was handled, previously known only by some members of the 2012 steering committee and a couple other bodies of the organization, were made public. The integrity of the process and the ruling were severely called into question by many members. For not a few comrades, this could be accurately described as a cover-up.
So where does this position the Denver Communists and the Revolutionary Socialist Network going forward? We believe that clarity on these issues that have divided the left are important to understand. In each historical period, it was crucial for revolutionary continuity to be on the correct side of these issues. However, the immediate practical importance of particular theories changes over time. Today, key dividing lines on the revolutionary left are different than during the Cold War. An exact analysis of Stalinism is important in the long run, but is not enough to form different groups now. Today, the revolutionary and would-be revolutionary left is primarily divided over four key questions. One, self-emancipation of the working class or elitist rule. Two, actually, I'll answer this one. The position that we take is the self-emancipation of the working class, not elitist rule. Number two, should Marxists support Democratic Party candidates? Our stance is to take no involvement in Democratic campaigns. Three, should Marxists support workers in their struggles against ruling classes in every country of the world, or should they instead oppose workers' movements in countries that are enemies of the US? Oppose imperialism everywhere. And four, should Marxists combine the fight against exploitation with the fight against oppression, or should Marxists take a class reductionist approach? We fight against both oppression and exploitation.
So what does it mean to join the Denver Communists? The Denver Communists have developed a set of documents that we will briefly touch on, and we can also link these at, and everybody can take a look at their own time as they'd like. The first is the points of unity, and then we have our bylaws, our code of conduct, and then our principles on sexual assault and domestic violence. So personally speaking, the points of unity for the Denver Communists are what really drew me into this organization and this work. The first is for socialism against capitalism. We are working radically on the left to build coalitions to fight against capitalism, to get workers' power. And this is the work that Denver Communists do in the streets, and they do it in their personal lives and where they work. And this is a revolutionary group. We focus on using reforms as a way to get power for workers, but it's a temporary solution. We need a revolution in this country and this world. We believe that. Internationalism, this fight here is our local fight is not the only fight that we fight. We also fight for international workers. We fight for freedom in Palestine, and we fight for freedom for people crossing our borders. And we don't just keep this work locally. It is an international perspective, and it is international work. We believe in full equality and liberation for all workers, for all those that are oppressed. And again, this is a revolutionary party. And then moving on to the bylaws. Logistically speaking, to join the Denver Communist, it is a $5 membership per month. And those dues are being collected through Patreon at the moment. And this group is very accessible to join. We encourage prospective members to meet with a current member of the group who does already pay dues with the group, and proceed with seeking membership in that way. And we also have a great a Slack channel that anybody can be added to. And so if you'd like to submit your email to that, to the chat, we can add you to our Slack. So routines and procedures, this is how the Denver Communists operate as a group internally, what our quorum is, which is defined as half of our active members plus one, all of those that are in good standing. And there's different routines and procedures in here that you guys can go through. Some of them that I thought stood out to me were the next topic, which was the roles and responsibilities. And sometimes in these questions or in these presentations, people like to present questions back. And I think one of the questions I had was who's currently in these roles that we have for membership and contact coordinator, treasurer, propaganda coordinator. And so I was thinking maybe in the discussion that we could share those and the responsibilities that they have. But we, as a general group, we do ask that people try to attend meetings as they're able and engage in learning and engage in direct action as it's accessible and as they're able to. So that kind of wraps up that slide. So the Denver Communist Code of Conduct is a document that was established in 2019, and it talks about how we can cultivate respect in our organizing spaces and with those that we interact with in coalition, and how we can create a welcoming and accommodating environment that refrains from exclusionary behavior. And when we, I don't know if you can hear my child singing in the background, but she's also presenting. So this is a quote from the Code of Conduct. We should not engage in behavior or speech, even ironically, that reinforces systems of oppression based on gender identity or expressions, sexual orientation, body size and physical appearance, disability, race, ethnicity, caste, color, religion, national origin, class, age, or profession. And harassment is not tolerated in these spaces, and we do our best to make sure that everybody feels included and respected. We are trying to increase accessibility for all, which is challenging in a virtual world, but something that is a team effort, and we work collaboratively behind the scenes to arrange agendas, set presentations, and there is the team and the chair do a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen. Again, we are working, and I quoted this quote before, we're working to not enforce systems of oppression in our spaces, and we know that as we've all grown up in these systems, they become ingrained to who we are in a way, and some of our behaviors. And so this is a space where we can call out those behaviors, those traits, and we can collectively work to break free from those systems of oppression in a safe and healthy space with our comrades. When it comes to being out and this code of conduct and being out in the streets and doing direct actions, the key, you can intervene if you feel safe, and this is really detailed in the code of conduct a little more, and I'd encourage everybody to take a look. And then there's some meeting conduct things where we like to center voices that haven't already been heard in some of our spaces. We like to center especially oppressed voices, and if you have a hard time speaking, we try to create an environment that is not gatekeeping, and it is welcoming to everyone who joins. So that's that, and I get to end on something nice and light, and I mean that. I shouldn't say that, because that's an example of speaking ironically in an oppressive way, but
I'm still learning too.
Yes, we're all still learning. The Denver Communists, specifically because of the past of the predecessor of the organization, we really want to be open and frank about our policies and principles on sexual assault and domestic violence. And this, the left has failed survivors, and we're seeking to correct that as a culture. And we're dedicated to believing and supporting survivors radically, and not as just a symbolic sign or slogan. And so if any member of the Denver Communists felt, or on the left felt like they experienced sexual assault or domestic violence, this would be a safe place where they could come, and there would be people to support them here. We do not victim blame, and their statement would be all that we needed, for example, to expel someone from the organization that they had said sexually assaulted or abused them. So we want to create an environment where we've called out this past behavior, where we prioritize the victim, and where we're not centering restorative justice practices. We are centering radically caring for and supporting the survivors. And that's all I will say on all that.
So, like the slide says, if you have a burning desire to understand and change the world, we want to work with you.
Nice. Hey, great job, y'all. Really great job.